Thank you. So first of all, I want to thank you guys for coming. I wasn't supposed to be speaking here today. There was supposed to be someone else, but I was a last-minute replacement. So thank you guys for being here. I'll be talking about Pulumi and Azure, but first let me introduce myself. I'm Lode. I'm a .NET developer for Access. We're an IT consultancy. I'm a .NET developer. I usually build web APIs or cloud-first applications in Azure. I also do quite some front-end like React, React Native. Sadly, I also program some AngularJS, but I'm trying to get rid of that. This is my first international conference, so if I sound a little nervous, that's because I am, and that's why I forgot the word nervous. What are the topics for today? I'll be talking about IAC, obviously. So what is IAC? Small introduction for you guys. I'll also be introducing you to Pulumi, one way to work with IAC. I know there's others like Terraform, Puppet, and so on. Then I'm going to try to do a live demo. Let's see how that goes. It's always risky, but I'm just going to go for it. I'll also have a few tips and tricks, more general, not specifically tied to Pulumi. Well, some of them will be, not all of them. And then I hope there will be time for questions, if there are any. So first off, what is IAC? Is there anyone in the room that's got experience with IAC? Kind of, okay. So let me tell you what it's all about. Obviously, it stands for Infrastructure as Code, and what you kind of want to start doing is transforming the way that you maintain your infrastructure in cloud providers like Azure, AWS, or GCP by instead of manually clicking everything together, you're going to start introducing the same way that you're used to writing code, but then applying it to cloud. So that would mean that every specific resource that you want to have in Azure or AWS or whatever, you would start writing code for that. And that also means that you can also start using CI/CD, continuous integration, for your cloud provider, which makes it way easier to make sure that your development environment, your acceptance environment, and your production environment are equal, which is really good. It's also very easy to make your infrastructure version, because from now on you will be writing code, so you can use Git or SVN if you're that kind of person. A big advantage about the CI/CD part as well is that you can now run it in the cloud. You can automate it in the pipeline instead of having to do everything from your local PC, having to do everything yourself. But there's another problem that I'm facing and why I use IAC. This is like a picture of our Azure environment, and I'm not sure if you can see it properly, so I'm going to zoom in. We have around 325 resources for one environment, so in total that adds up to 975, and we weren't using IAC before. So imagine having to manage all of that just by clicking in the cloud. It's the worst thing ever, because you don't know what changed. So it's really mind-blowing, because you don't know who changed what changed, when was it changed, why did it change? What was the previous setting? And is everything still exactly the same? I know there's activity logs in Azure and stuff, but those only go back 30 days, so you'll lose all your history. This slide is really chaotic by intention, by the way. The rest is going to be better. But it's really annoying to have to manage that many resources manually, and you just lose control. So we can start using Git. And the nice thing about Git that we all know is that we can see who committed what. One of the things we do is, oh, damn, this code is really shitty. And then you right-click, and the first thing you do is you click blame to see who wrote the code. And then it's usually you, but 6 months ago. Every commit can now start containing ticket numbers as well, so you can relate the changes to your infrastructure to a certain business case or whatever. When a queue has been created, you can know that in which context it was created. So it's really nice to attach ticket numbers to see who changed what, to attach messages to your infrastructure changes instead of having to do it manually in the cloud. Another thing I talked about before is CI/CD. You might want to introduce manual approval flows, so whenever there's a change in your code for your cloud, you get a preview of what is going to change. We're going to walk through that later on. But before you actually output it to the cloud, you probably want to manually approve it, because you don't want to have some random new guy in your team have to be able to delete a database in production or whatever. But that also means that whenever your code changes, you can deploy your infrastructure together. So it's possible that whenever you deploy something new to production, when you need this new queue in Azure Service Bus, that you could run Pulumi right before that, have the queue be created automatically, and then straight ahead deploy your code to the cloud. So everything will always be in sync. I've literally had it happen that a queue was not created in production on Friday night, and then we were deploying to production. It was a real joy having to figure it out that it was that specific queue. So some general concepts of IAC. Now let me introduce you to Pulumi. Anyone who's used Pulumi before? I guess not, because there was only one IAC user. No? Okay. But first, let me introduce you to a friend of mine. He's called the Pulumi Puss. He's the mascot of Pulumi. He lives in Seattle, just like the company, and he looks like this. I think he's quite cute. Pulumi is free to use for one member, so if you feel like trying it out afterwards, feel free to do so. Once you start having more people, like a bigger organization, it's going to be almost impossible to run it through one user, because it kind of defeats the purpose. But you can do that. You can run it in Azure, AWS, or GCP. We're going to use Azure today because I'm most comfortable with it. But if you want to use this demo that I'm going to do for something else, sure, go ahead. One of the main advantages I find in Pulumi is that it's way easier for developers to step in than something like Terraform. You don't have to start writing HCL straight off the bat, because it's sometimes overwhelming for the dinosaurs on your team that have been there for 15 years. So if they have been writing C# or whatever for 15 years in their life and they haven't really written something else, they can just keep using the same programming language. Or I heard Sam making some jokes about YAML today. If you feel comfortable writing YAML, you can do that as well. So it's really entry level. It fits your team much better, in my opinion. We're going to use C# today for everything I'm going to show you. So let's say I want to get started. What do you do? It depends. Are you a Mac or Windows or Linux user or whatever? I don't have demos for Linux, because they didn't have demos for Linux. So this is all Mac or Windows. So you either need Brew or Chocolatey, or you can download the binary straight away. You run choco install Pulumi or Brew install Pulumi/tap/Pulumi. Nothing too important. You need .NET for this, or Java, or whatever you want to use. You have to install the Azure CLI and log into it. Why is that important? Whenever you want to see what changes it would do in the cloud to you, it's going to use that CLI instance for you, your credentials that you are logged in with, to talk to the Azure API. Then the next thing you can do is run the command Pulumi new Azure C# to create a new project that basically consists of two parts. Azure means the cloud provider that you're using could be either Azure, AWS, GCP. I think that's all they support right now. And then the second part could be C#, Java, TypeScript, Go. So make any combination that you like. After running this command, it's going to ask you a few questions. The name of your project, what do you want to call it? The name of the project description, quite trivial, not going into that too much. But then also the stack name. Stack name is basically a copy of your resources that are going to be aligned. So you'll probably want a stack per environment. So for your development environment, your acceptance environment, and your production environment. We're just going to use dev today because we are only going to demo one thing. Then there's also the location. So the last part of the Pulumi setup are the questions that are specific to the cloud provider you chose. And the Azure one is going to ask you for the default Azure location that you want to use. So we're going to use West Europe. It's going to spit out a CS project file, a program.cs file, a gitignore file, a YAML, and two YAML files. We know we love that. Let's talk about the YAML files first. The first one is going to contain some general stuff about your project. Again, the name, description, the runtime. We're not going to go into that too much. But the second file is a bit more important. it's always pulumi.stackname.yaml. So that means that you're going to get a separate configuration file per environment that you create, per stack that you create. So that means that if you would want to have, if you would have like a development team in Belgium, but your actual product would be more likely to be used in the US or whatever, then you could create a separate configuration file per stack, and you could have the development team be in West Europe and production team be in the West US or whatever. And then there's the big file, program.cs file. It's quite big, but I'm going to walk through it like zoomed in. I don't know if it's readable, but it should be now. So let's look at part one. It's quite obvious what this means. It's pulumi.deployment.run a sync, so it's going to run a deployment on Pulumi. I don't know if to explain anything else, but... And then the first resource that we're going to create is a resource group. And the way that you create resources in Pulumi is just by calling the constructor. So it's not like you have to await anything or run a separate call per resource to create it. Just calling the constructor is more than fine enough. So we do var resource group equals new resource group, and we specify the name between the quotes. And that's it. First resource is created. Next, the next thing we're going to create is a storage account. So there's a bit more to it than the resource group, but not that much more. It's the same thing again, we call it constructor, but this time we're going to add second parameters, the new storage account args. And then we have to specify which resource group we want to create it in. So we specify the resource group name, we specify the tier that we want to create it in, so storage v2, and some other options, but they're not too important. But now we've created a resource group and a storage account in it. But you can imagine that when you create a storage account, well, now you have a resource group with a storage account, but what are you going to do with the storage account? You want to get the connection string or whatever, unless you're using something like managed identity, but we're just going to use a connection string today. And this is where Pulumi gets a bit more special, because I don't know if anyone's noticed yet, but we're using a static method called list storage account keys.invoke, and we pass down arguments, the resource group name and the account name. But it's not returning us the keys straight away. It's returning something of type, output of list storage account keys result. And then when you read along on line 29, it says storage account keys.apply. So what this means is that you're not getting like the results straight away, because it's actually quite obvious why not, because it has to wait to invoke that function for the storage account key to be created. And for the storage account to be created, it has to wait for the resource group to be created. So this is like an actual async output of your method, but it's not async await. So when we get into the apply method on line 29, whenever we get into like the func that's going in there, so the account keys and then the error sign, that's when you actually get the result. So then we get the list of keys, we get the first key, and we get the value from it, and then we return a secret. And as you can see as well, on line 29, the type of primary storage key, it's not string, it's output string. Again, because that has to wait for the list storage account keys to have been invoked, to wait for the storage account to be invoked, to wait for the resource group to be created. And then on line 26, and this is quite 36, and that's quite interesting in my opinion. Then at the end of our deployment, we return a new dictionary with a string and object in it. What does this do? Pulumi allows you to share certain information between projects. So that means that in theory, you could create a separate project in Pulumi per microservice if you're into that stuff. You could share information between it. So if you would have multiple connection string that in some way you would want to share to another project, I'm not sure why you would want to do that, but you can. Then you can do it this way. So you can just return a dictionary and it'll pop up in your next project for you to use. So now we have the storage account and we have an output variable. So how do we put this online? First thing we're going to do is to run Pulumi preview. What Pulumi preview does, it shows you what it's going to do to the cloud. So it's quite descriptive. It says, okay, I'm going to create a new stack in Pulumi, I'm going to create a new resource group, and I'm going to create a new storage account. And then as output from your project, I'm going to have a primary storage key. Looks fine, okay. Then we run Pulumi up, and it's going to show me the same preview again, so I just always use the Pulumi up command because it's annoying. But we already saw that it's fine, so now instead of just like showing as a preview and ending it, it's gonna do ask you whether you want to like propagate this update to the cloud. So we can say yes. And afterwards, it's just gonna say, yay, created, unless something goes terribly wrong. But in this case, it went just fine. Let's see what this looks like in the cloud. One thing that's really annoying about Pulumi, in my opinion, is that we created a resource group called resource group, but it's not called resource group in Azure. It's called resource group 3E nil 8858E. That's a really ugly name. But there's a reason why they do that, because in Azure, some things have to have unique names across the whole of Azure. Now, I think? No, yeah, it's back. No, the battery sign is blinking. Yeah, so some resources in Azure have to be unique. For example, when you create a web service, all the domain name, they automatically get assigned a domain name, suffixed by .azurewebsites.net. So that domain name has to be unique across the whole of Azure. So the way that Pulumi handles that, it still allows you to use your name in Pulumi, but it will automatically add a suffix. So it's really quite nice that you can always use your name that you want, but it's going to be different in the cloud. Shouldn't really matter that much, but it will be a really ugly name. Luckily, there's a way around. Yeah. Yes, thank you. All right, we should be back. So that was quite the cliffhanger. Yeah, I was about to talk about how you can use your custom resource name if you really want to. Because, for example, an app service plan, which for the people that are not familiar with it, is basically like a server on which you can host managed applications. So when we create a new app service plan, we again do the same thing. It's getting quite repetitive. We pass down second arguments. We pass down the kind of application that we're making, which is a web app. We pass down the name again, so that's what you can see. We have like 2 red squares. The upper one is the name that Pulumi will know it as, so it will be called App Service Plan inside Pulumi. But the name that it will start using in Azure itself will be the name that you specify in the second argument. So that would be my exact name. And then again, we pass down a resource group and like the tier of app service plan that you want to create. So B1, pretty cheap for the demo. And on the right side, you can see when we up this to the cloud, it will actually create an app service plan with the name, my exact name. Fantastic. So now we've created a resource group, a storage account, an app service plan, but we still need an app service. And again, it's going to look quite the same. We call a constructor web app. We pass down a name. Then we pass second arguments with a resource group name. Then we pass down the server farm ID, which is the app service plan it's going to run on. So it's all about like passing through IDs and names and stuff to make sure that everything's connected correctly. And then down in the app settings, we can pass down a new value pair list, which is just like the name says, a pair of a name and a value, which we're going to call storage, and the value is going to be a primary storage key. So that means that we're going to put the storage key connection string inside the app settings. And then when we hit next, we can see that in the cloud, the value of the storage will actually be filled in with the connection string to the storage account, which is great. And now on to the tricky part, the demo. So we have a resource group, storage account, app service plan, and an app service with the storage key in. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you what the Pulumi portal looks like. So you can manage everything in the cloud and look at it in the cloud, so see what your state is like, what Pulumi thinks your resource is supposed to be like. We're going to add application insights, something to track and log everything, and we're going to add that to the web app, and then we're going to add SQL Server. So first, let me show you what, okay, let me first, like, I'm going to run the command to, is this readable or is this not readable? Okay, I'll enter presentation mode. Okay, now I have to find the terminal. Yes. Okay, so this is the same code that we saw earlier. The only thing I'm going to run again is Pulumi up to put everything in the cloud so you get an idea what that looks like. It shouldn't take too long. It's not that much, but so we're going to hit yes. So typically you wouldn't run this in your CI/CD pipeline, but for demo purposes, I'm just running it off my computer. So it already says it created a resource group, it created a storage account and an app service plan. Let's take a look in Azure what we can see already. This is my MSDN subscription. I'll zoom in again. So as I said before, we can see that the resource group has been created, this time with a different suffix. It will pick a different suffix every time, called resource group A2NIL64C3D. Let's open that up. Well, this is strange. It says the app service plan and the storage account have already been created, but it's not visible. I'm not sure why. I think this is just an Azure thing, but sometimes it takes like 30 seconds a minute before for it to pop up. There it is. And sometimes it disappears again. We should be there. Yeah. Okay. So you can see, like, not very secure, the full connection string, but it's fine. Let's refresh again. See, it disappeared. Okay, let's take a look at what it looks like in Pulumi itself. So when you go to Pulumi, you have to sign in. You have to create an account, and a new project is going to pop up. I call my project conference. You can see that there's one stack called dev. Let's open it. Let's see what's inside. And we can see the same output of the primary storage key. We can see the location that we're using, West Europe. We can see the subscription ID that we're using. But if we go to the resource tab, then we can also see all the resources attached to it. we can see that there's a stack, a web app, an app service plan, the provider itself with the version attached to it, the resource group, and a storage account. So this also provides you a really good way to see everything that if you're like migrating to infrastructure as code, you can like see what has already been migrated and what has not been migrated yet. And this is more like low level than you would think. Like, for example, a queue in service bus or whatever would also be in here. So it's very, very, very like deep. Everything should be in Azure now. Yes, it's here. Okay, so let's open that up. Connection string should be here. Yes, it's there. Okay, let's hop back into code. So the first thing we're going to do is add application insights. Now, one thing I wanted to show is that Pulumi's names aren't really perfect. They're sometimes actually quite annoying. So I have Pulumi installed. It's a NuGet package. It comes with the project by default. So you would think that if I type like application insight, I only get like a command. It's not there. Maybe insights? No, it's not there either. So I think their naming could be a bit better. Maybe a recommendation for them if any one of them is watching. I don't think so, but. So the way we can find it is like Pulumi.Azure native and then insights. And then it's called component for some reason. Yeah, I don't know. Let's just go ahead with it. We're going to call it insights. But you're probably, if you use Pulumi, there will be more components like this where the names are pretty hard, but the documentation is pretty good. If you were to Google Pulumi application insights, you'll probably find the right thing that you need to use. We have to pass down a few things. The things that you would typically select when setting up Pulumi in like the UI as well. So application type would be application type dot web. So a web. Application insights kind would be web as well. Everything that you have to fill in here is basically also available on the Pulumi website. And then we're going to say the resource group again. Would be resource group.name. And as you can see here, again, it's also of type output because it has to wait for the resource group to be there. All right, so let's remove this. Now we want to use this in our app service. The way that we can do that is by adding a configuration string that's called app_insight_instrumentation key. But I like typed this under here, so I have to move it back up above the app service because we want to use it in there. Do note though, when you as many things that you start adding to like app settings and of which you start using the output, it's always gonna keep waiting for everything to be there before you start creating the app service. So new name equals app insights underscore instrumentation key. I think that's right. Value is going to be app insights dot instrumentation key. So I'm not sure why this is different than like invoking a static method. They're not always very consistent with that. Let's run that again. Shouldn't take too long either. So now you can see that it's actually going to tell you that it's going to update the app service instead of like throw it away and recreate it. Because something I often hear is that people are scared, oh no, my storage account is going to disappear because I'm not going to know what's going to happen. Well, it like 100% tells you exactly what it's going to do. So let's run that. Should be ready in like a minute. Yes. Let's refresh this. Yes, it's here. So that's great. Now we can start using application insights. Next thing I want to talk about is SQL Server. The reason I'm using SQL Server is that it's a database. You probably do not want to like choose the username and the password yourself. And Pulumi has a great way to like work with this. Pulumi is something that you can install. It's called pulumi.random. And what it will do, it will generate a username or a password for you. And it will also store this in Pulumi so that every time you update something to the cloud, it'll store it encrypted. and it will always keep using the same username and password, so that every time you regenerate it, it's not gonna like regenerate your username and password, and you will never have to manage that yourself. So the thing is, if you can't like manage it, then nobody else can manage it or steal it either, right? So we're gonna have to create that on top of the app service again, because we're gonna use a connection string in there. And then we can use for our username equals, and I think it's called Pulumi.random, random string, it's new. Pass down a name, so we're just gonna call it database username. Pass down arguments, and then we can like specify a few things. One thing I find really annoying, and sometimes it doesn't work properly in connection string, is special characters. In theory, it should work, but let's turn it off. And then there's also the length. Let's just say 20 characters. Should be fine. And to create a password is very similar. The only difference is that in Pulumi itself, you will be able to see the username. You will not be able to see the password because it's secret. So we can say for password equals same thing, random password instead. Let's call that db password and change the arguments to random password args. Okay, great. So now we have username and password. Next, we're going to create a SQL server. So for our SQL equals new, this is better named, SQL.server. Call that SQL server. It's gonna like add a suffix anyway. So this is a good case why you would want to add a suffix. A lot of projects only need like one SQL server because databases are like tiered separately and paid for separately, and they have their own DTUs and performance counters and stuff. So you can have just one database server. It's fine. Let's pass the server args. And there's a few things we need to fill in. So the administrator login, we're not going to choose that ourselves. That's why we created a username. Let's use a username.result. Again, of type output string, because it's got to wait for it to be generated and upserted to Pulumi. There's also going to be administrator login password. Same thing, password.result. And then the usual stuff, location equals resource group location. So let's make sure that we're in the same location. Oh. Resource group name. And we're going to enable public network access. So SQL dot, what's the type again? Server public network access. So you can see what type you can insert. Public network access enabled. Yay! So now we should have a SQL server. Let's create one last thing, a database. And when we've created a database, then we basically have everything we need to build the connection string, which I'm going to copy paste because it's not going to create the connection string for us automatically. So let's do for our database equals new SQL.database. Let's call it database. Very original. Pass down a database name called data. This is something you wouldn't want suffixed, right? A database name, kind of weird. Same thing again, resource group name. This is something I think they could do better. Having to pass the resource group name every time while you're already going to have to specify the server that you're putting it in. They're going to be in the same resource group. So I think some improvements could be made there. Same for location. I don't see how you could have a database in a separate location than your server. Well, maybe you can, but I don't think so. So we're passing down the database name, resource group name, location name, server name, and this is what I meant by the performance is like measured by the database itself. So you have the SKU, so the kind of tier that you want to use for your database it's specified on database level, not on server level. So it's perfectly fine to have to have one database server. Standard, it's pretty cheap, so. This is something I think they could improve on too. Like, how the hell do you know that you have to enter standard or name here? The way that you know, well, the way that I've often found out, is that you go look into Azure, you create the resource manually yourself, then you look at the JSON that it generates, and then the same property names are in there. But it's often the same thing for things like Terraform, though. It's not a specific Pulumi thing, I think. It's just something that IAC in general could improve on. Okay, so now we have a database as well, and now I'm going to copy the part for the connection string because it's way too long. I can't find the cursor. Okay, here it is. Okay, so this is something new. What if you need the combined output of multiple things to generate a new thing? Like the connection string would be a combination of the username, the password, and the name of the SQL server to generate the connection string. So that's something you can use output.tuple for, to which you can pass multiple outputs, and it will wait for all of them to have generated before you can use it. So use output.tuple with the username result, the password .result, which are all of output type, and the name of the SQL server. Then you do the same apply function that we used earlier, and next the only thing that you're going to return is a string, which is the build-up version of your connection string, which is what we're expecting. But then again, this is of output type string, but it doesn't really matter for the app service. The app service can handle outputs of type string. So then we can add a new app setting. New name equals database connection. Value equals, what's it called? SQL connection string. And that should be it. So let's open the terminal, run Pulumi up again. It should only create the resources that I just added. Sure. I'm just going to run it. I don't think I have time left to wait for it because sometimes SQL Server takes like 2 minutes to provision. So let's go back to the slides. So what have we done? We've created a resource group, storage account, app service plan, app service, SQL Server, and application insight. So basically we've created everything to build our application. The only thing we haven't done is deploy our code, but I don't think that's very relevant to showcase here. Let me tell you some tips and tricks for using something like IAC. First off, put everything in Pulumi, please. Don't start managing some stuff yourself manually because it's going to get really confusing for what is managed automatically by the code, what is managed by you manually. In theory, when you start using Pulumi, you could use a service principal, which means that only the service principal would be authenticated to make changes in your Azure environment, and you can take all of your employees' permissions to modify stuff in Azure. Really nice way to make sure that everything goes through Pulumi or Terraform. Use configurations and secrets. You might, the YAML files that we saw per stack, you might want to put in secrets like an SMTP server that could be different per environment and stuff. So you could have a separate configuration file. Also put that in Pulumi. Please use proper names for your resources. Don't use resource group. I know it's very easy to copy and paste from the tutorials, but start using proper names. It doesn't really matter because it's less visible. It's in your code, so it's easier for you to read. But for people that look into Azure, it's way harder to get a hang of. Look at stacks for your distributed. I was going to say your microservices, but instead I went for distributed applications because nobody really does microservices. But look into that, share secrets between your stacks. That's really nice because then you can deploy every stack per microservice separately instead of having to update your whole infrastructure together. And then the last thing, as I said, please use a service principal if you can, and do not use your own credentials because then if you leave the company, there's another issue. Some misconceptions. IAC is dangerous. What if my storage account gets deleted all of a sudden? Well, it shouldn't unless you approved it. And if it does, I think Microsoft has a retention policy of 30 days when your storage account gets deleted. Please do not start being this person that wants to sync all his data to AWS or something. The next thing, I'll start using IAC later. It's not necessary at the start. I showed you that we had 325 resources that have to be manually migrated to infrastructure as code. It's really, really tough because every single setting that's in every single queue and whatever has to be the exact same, or otherwise Pulumi or Terraform is going to want to recreate it. And it's fine for a queue, unless there's messages in it, or a storage account, unless there's data in it, because then you have to recover it and reattach it anyway. It comes with a lot of hassle. IEC is hard. No, not really. It's just code. Just make sure you start early and make sure your team's ready for it. Yeah, take a course, watch a talk. All right, I guess that's it. I want to thank you guys for watching. I do not know how much time I have left. Not much, I think. So if there's any questions, I'll happily answer them.
Yep, and I will check if we have some questions in Pine. Speaking of your time, you are just on the dot.
Oh, fantastic.
Literally on the dot. That is very nice. Any question from the audience first? If you would wait a second so the Pine audience could hear you too. Here you go.
Hello. Does Pulumi deal with drifting somehow? For example, a person goes in, changes a connection string. Will it see it? And will it see it only on the deployment time or somehow earlier?
So if someone manually changes something in the cloud, yes, it will see it and it will override it again.
But is it only on deployment time, or are there tools, for example, to check every, I don't know, an hour?
As far as I know, it's only on deployment time. So that's why you should take people's permissions.
Okay, thank you. Do you have a question? You seem like you have a lot.
I have so many questions. Can you maybe give us a little bit of insight on why migrating an existing infrastructure to Pulumi, what the steps are that you took to make sure that stuff didn't get recreated?
Well, there's always the Pulumi preview command that you can make sure that nothing's gonna be thrown away. But first, what you want to do is probably make an export of what there currently is in Azure or AWS in like a JSON, because it's easier to read the properties. And then you have to like manually start creating the resources. And then there's this import command, because the thing is, I used to name like resource group and then would attach something to it. But Pulumi needs the identifier. So instead of just writing the code and having the same name, it's not going to automatically know that this is that. So you will have to look at the identifier that's in Azure and then run Pulumi import, specify the type, specify the name, and then specify the identifier in Azure. You're going to have to do it for every resource, and a resource in Pulumi is not just what you see as a resource in Azure. It's also a queue. It's also a web application slot. It's every little thing. So, and when that's done, when you've gone through it, then you run Pulumi preview, and then it's going to complain still about like 250 things. And then you look at them manually and go through it. So that's why you start from the beginning. Or the best way is, the easiest way would be to take a backup of your database, take a backup of your storage account, delete everything, recreate it, and then import everything. If you can do that. Most people can't, but.
Okay, thank you. You said that that this is your first international presentation?
Yes, it is.
How did he do?
Thank you.
Nicely. Okay, how do you feel? Because you seemed shy before and not so shy right now.
I'm not very shy. No, I'm fine. I'm fine. It's fantastic.
Not nervous?
Yeah. No,
okay,
not
because
really.
you did greatly, and you're actually, well, it's the beginning of the day, but you're already my favorite speaker because you were exact 45 minutes, which is
Thank you.
less for me to talk, you know. Like a pro, yeah, drop it. Okay, if we don't have any more questions, and I see like, oh, it seems like we don't, then thank you very much. You can applaud him just a little.
Thank you.
A little bit less than that, thank you. And yeah, we will be back in 10 minutes with another session.